All right, there he is, Alexander Abnos, whose story, Messi's ires, free publicity for MLS, so why is the league editing it out? That's a tough word to say fast. Got me thinking. Alexander, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
How's it going, Jason? Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm going to throw up the headline here so people can see what I'm talking about, what Alexander wrote on at The Guardian. So I guess the background is important, right, Alexander? This is all about a back pass gone awry and an interview that Lionel Messi felt it felt necessary to give Michele Giannoni afterwards.
Yeah, so that's the sort of root thing that happened. But the thing that made me actually write this column and that got me all sort of worked up on a Monday, basically, was that I went back to watch the highlight of this particular play. This is, there was a back pass it wasn't a back pass. There was a play that Lionel Messi thought that was a back pass that led immediately to a goal by Orlando City. And so I went back to try to watch that goal. And the YouTube highlight of this thing is hilarious. It starts with Luis Muriel. Like, there's a whole play that, Pedro Gallese launches the ball downfield, a really great long range pass, really. And Luis Muriel has to carry the ball quite a long ways. He's basically one-on-one with the keeper. I think he has like one defender trailing him. And he finishes, and Orlando goes up 1-0. Very big moment in the game. And it starts with Luis Muriel probably like 10 yards from goal, 10 yards from the goalkeeper, and it just completely cuts out the entire origin of the play. And this is not necessarily something that's new for soccer highlights and MLS highlights, but in this particular case, you had the commentators talking about.
Oh, frozen Alexander. There he is. Sorry.
Oh,
Alex,
sorry.
you froze just a second, but yeah, you were talking about the commentators involved in this.
Yeah. The commentators were talking about it. Messi was complaining, and they just never showed the origin of the play. And I thought that was, it just got me, between that and the fact that Messi gave this interview talking about how referees need to be looked at by MLS, that was initially tweeted and then deleted and then tweeted again without those things. It just became clear that they were trying to, bury this moment one way or another. And
Well,
yeah,
let's be clear here. I think you and I have been around a while, and people who cover Major League Soccer know that this is not new. And really,
yeah,
let's make sure it's clear as well that MLS isn't alone in trying to control messaging, right?
absolutely not.
Every individual club has been doing it since the league began. But the league itself also has been very conscious of its messaging. It's just now that the media ecosphere around Major League Soccer has shrunk to such a small level because they've paywalled the league essentially, right? And because
Yeah.
and maybe we can talk about whether you think the Apple deal has exacerbated a problem that already existed or if it created a problem. Because I can tell you that as a veteran of American soccer media, things have kind of consolidated around sort of big media organizations, but then those organizations now don't have rights to broadcast MLS in most respects, so they now have less incentive to cover the league outside of maybe a broadcast that trickles over to a Fox or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reason I wrote about this, and I think what I've thought about as I've been reading some of the reactions to the column, the reason I found this to be so interesting is that it's kind of the perfect encapsulation of what happens when you have a moment like this that doesn't necessarily make the league look amazing. Um, and for what it's worth, I don't actually blame MLS all that much for doing what they did. They have a policy where they can't have criticism of the league on their own platforms. I think that's a perfectly sensible policy to have if you're MLS. You don't want people on the MLS Twitter account calling MLS bad in any
Right.
way. So, like, I get it. There's a perfectly reasonable explanation for that. I just think that, they're trading the ability to talk about moments like that for that policy for the Apple deal, which enables them to broadcast games the way they've been able
Right.
to broadcast games.
Look, again, and we've got some comments in here. Okay, I'm gonna
Sure.
throw some of these up.
Please do.
Thomas saying, why would an editor editing a highlight film for an American audience put in highlights of players complaining? That you've made that point, right? You're right. That doesn't make any sense intuitively. Like, why would you put Lionel Messi? Now, again, if the entire sequence sort of involves this moment where Messi kind of touches the ball, it touches an Orlando player. There's they're sort of confused, but it all kind of leads to Muriel's goal. I could see justifying that, even if it does look like Messi is complaining. Uh,
Yeah.
Point about the collective editing. But my issue here largely is that if MLS was like most big time American sports leagues, like the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, even hockey to an extent, you could rely on a media engine outside of the league's auspices to cover this, to talk about it, to make it into a thing. Now, this is also kind of like, oh, well, soccer's not really big yet. But that's the point, because Major League Soccer doesn't have the advantages the NFL does with 24-hour wall-to-wall coverage of their product, regardless, good or bad, which benefits the NFL. The NFL doesn't have to say, we're going to highlight the bad stuff. Somebody else will highlight that, but it brings up the drama. It jacks up everybody's interest in what's going to happen next. And now you have that conversation around the league. And MLS lacks that. So I think more than sort of who's at fault here, Alexander, it's to me the issue of MLS lacks this thing that most leagues can rely on. And I don't know what the answer is to getting it going.
Yeah, I mean, this is like I really don't mean to like I know I wrote a whole column about it, but I don't mean to harp on this one call. Like I think that this is ultimately one small symptom of a larger problem, as you correctly point out. I mean, I would also point out that MLS is the only league that is producing, not just like offering for broadcast, but producing the production of every single one of their games.
Right.
They're the only league that does this. NFL doesn't do that. NBA doesn't do it. MLB doesn't do it. NHL doesn't do it. The Premier League and the top five European leagues, they do it to a certain extent, but it's not as if they're building programming and assigning announcers and like sending that everywhere. They do have like a world feed, but it's not, it's just a different sort of thing than building an entire media ecosystem basically from nothing. I think they
Right.
deserve a lot of credit for doing that. And I think by and large, they do a great job of covering the league. But I just think that you run into these moments where it's going to run up against MLS policy, and that just creates,
Right. Right. You're
a
boxed
shortage
in.
of coverage.
You're boxed in, and
Yeah,
it again, you sort of lament, this is the thing. We're lamenting the fact there's not more coverage, but I guess this is where the questioning is. Does MLS have the right approach? Are they thinking about this in the right way strategically when everything is kind of becoming an in-house product? And you mentioned those other leagues don't broadcast, don't produce their own they want to. They certainly
they
want
would
to
love
do
to.
the
Yeah,
same thing Major League Soccer is doing, but they don't. And again, because of the history that's behind them that pushes them forward, they don't necessarily have to worry, well, if we produce our own stuff, nobody will talk about our controversial moments. People will. Will do that because there's so much invested locally in coverage. Now, people are pointing out U.S. men's national team total football. MLS is a global audience. How do you think that relates to this story, this question? Because obviously with Lionel Messi, we're talking about a global superstar who's here in Major League Soccer, supposed to put wind in the sails of the league, not just in the U.S., but around the world. The interview he gives to Michele Giannoni is in Spanish, right? He's speaking his native language, which is a global language, more
hmm
Spanish speakers natively than English speakers on the planet, Alexander. So how does that tie into the way MLS is doing this?
Well, I think that's really the key for this whole situation, and part of the reason why it's worth talking about, I think, is because I think if Messi hadn't talked to Michele after the game, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this. I would have never written this column because he talks so rarely. This is not somebody that is out there on a microphone all the time, really going out of his way to sell the league in the way a lot of other past DPs have. Now, does he necessarily have to do that? No, he hasn't. He's an amazing player that does amazing things on a regular basis. I think that's enough. That's fine. But it does create the effect that when he does talk and when he does say things, it really matters. And like the criticism that he offered is a relatively measured criticism. It's not like he's going off. He's not on some sort of a rant. He's saying, listen, I thought that was a strange situation. I thought it was a back pass. We suffered some other calls in the previous game that I didn't agree with either. I think MLS should look at the referees. A lot of other players have said this. A lot of other coaches have said this. I grew up watching Kansas City Wizards, Sporting Kansas City. Peter Vermes did this on a weekly basis, but Peter Vermes is not somebody that has the same kind of global reach as Lionel Messi. When he says stuff, it matters. And I think that the fact that he said this and that they're then not only cutting off that part of the interview from what they tweeted, but also cutting off the very part of the play that he's talking about. it's just denying the reality of the situation and denying the reality of what happened in your league and preventing people the opportunity to talk about it in an informed way and in a way that might actually create some momentum and buzz around the league. Um,
I also
and
think that we're in this moment, Alexander, where people are consuming sports in little bite-sized pieces
mm,
via highlights, via moments. Not, I'm watching full games, but I'm not watching every full game on an MLS weekend. There's 15 of them. Nobody can possibly do that. So why wouldn't you again want to give a fuller picture, right? You can talk about, well, that makes the league look bad and why wouldn't the league do that, but I do think that maybe the default policy should be, let's give the full picture, because we know people are, and again, this is also about the paywall and how these highlights are being distributed, because if they were happening on, say, ESPN or Fox or any other sort of traditional linear television network, it wouldn't be up to MLS to share it
right.
that way.
Yeah. And I should say also that it's not as if like I acknowledge, by the way, that MLS has a series on YouTube called Instant Replay, where Andrew Wiebe does a great job going through all these controversial calls and saying whether or not it was right or wrong. I think it's great that they do that. I think there's also a pretty big difference between having that show that I believe only exists on YouTube and having having a discussion point on the primary media partner of MLS before and after the game, involving the biggest player, still maybe the most famous player in the world, certainly the most famous in the league. So it's not as if I really don't want to create the impression that I think that there's some like grand conspiracy to like obscure anything that's bad about MLS. I think they're willing to talk about calls at times. They're willing to talk about referees at times. But I just think that there's a limit to how much they can do it, and especially in the case of Messi, what they're able to show and what they're willing to show. And that may be just be the price that they're willing to pay, and the price that we have to pay as soccer watchers in the US, because Apple offered them the best broadcast deal. And
Okay,
it is a very good broadcast deal. Like the
I'm
games
gonna
look amazing.
I'm gonna try to pull together some threads here and some thinking, right? Because
Sure.
again, this is a bit of a hobby horse for me, which is why I asked Alexander to come on the show, because I've been, like a lot of people, I've been trying to make soccer my life, American soccer my life, right? And I've been lucky enough, and whatever, showing a little bit of talent here or there, to have a job in soccer, to be able to do something like this on a Wednesday morning instead of going into an office and punching numbers into a computer, which I guess everybody's being replaced by AI anyway. But my point is, like, I at my nature, I want American soccer to be bigger, to be more interesting, to capture more attention. I'm not sure why, Alexander. Sometimes I get into this inception kind of conversation in my head. Why do I
You and
care?
me both, dude.
MLS is not going anywhere, right? I
Yeah.
know MLS is going to happen next year. Should that be enough? Or am do I need the game to be bigger to validate my interest in the sport? Who knows? But I think we all have this sense, right? We're all kind of boosters of American soccer. And when you watch any television based around sports, or listen to any radio based around sports, or just sit on social media, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, whatever, for longer than 5 minutes, you run into somebody talking about the latest controversy in the NFL, in the NBA. There's this rolling conversation that scoops up millions of eyeballs and millions of ears around the sports, that it's not necessarily just about who had a double double or a triple double or who scored the touchdown. It's sort of this other thing. It's the drama of it, right?
Mm,
It's the pro wrestling elements of sports. And MLS has always lacked this. I mean, MLS has always come up short, and we've tried to manufacture, I don't mean make up things. I mean, like, we've tried to force the issue covering these things. Like, we can go back to Sean Francis and the offside rules and things like that. People will remember. Some
yeah.
people are old enough to remember, Alexander. Um, and I don't know, like, that's the thing that is frustrating me. And sometimes I just think we're past that point. The window is closed, because the world has evolved and changed in a way from a media consumption perspective that we just can't do that. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I necessarily agree. I think that discussion points are discussion points, and people, part of the joy of being a sports fan, and especially of being a soccer fan, is that you get to be in all these conversations around things that might not have anything to do with the play on the field. I mean, how many times have we talked about I don't know, the job security of the Man United coach of the moment, just to pull something crazy. Like, I don't know. It's so tough to choose a specific example because these moments and these discussions are happening all the time. Was it a penalty? Was it not a penalty? How about that handball call? These are all things that people are talking about all the time in soccer, in the United States too, by the way. And I just don't see those conversations happening around MLS moments. And this seemed like a moment that where it could have happened to a degree. Like, is it the biggest call in the entire world? No, it was
No,
the first
no.
goal. It was the first goal of a 3-0 game. Miami completely deserved to lose that game. They were generally very bad. But it is a moment that the most famous player, once again, pointed out specifically where he rarely, rarely, rarely talks. So, like, this to me is like screaming a golden opportunity, and it was sort of left for
Yeah.
other people to do. And there's limited reach that we have compared with, again, the league's official only exclusive
Yeah.
broadcaster.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation. It doesn't feel like there's an easy answer to any of this, but I love these conversations. I know that's not everybody's favorite
Little inside
thing.
baseball, but hey.
Yeah, no, it is, but again, I think all of it, like, if you just want to engage with the game on the field and watch the games, that is possible. It's just that I feel like we're missing something around MLS in particular, and the league's been so at such a fevered pace to add clubs and build stadiums and doing good things like that. That there's this issue where we're missing part of what makes sports interesting, right? I don't
Yeah,
need I don't need Marcus Rashford on a bender kind of story, but that's the thing, Alexander. Those stories are part of the culture, and you don't wish for negative stories to come out,
yeah.
right? But we know that that's the kind of thing that sells, right?
Yeah. Well, and I will also say it's not as if these stories don't exist and that they're not being done, and it's not as if these conversations aren't being had. It's just not on mainstream sports channels. The MLS made a decision that they're basically outside of having like what one game a week on FS1. They're not going to be on the main mainstream sports channels. So as a result, we have what is becoming, I think, a pretty well developed independent scene of coverage that includes, podcasts, YouTube shows like you guys. I think Total Soccer Show does a great job. Scuffed. Then you have independent sites. You have Backheeled. You have American Soccer Analysis. You have
Yeah. Yeah.
local sites like 615 Soccer in Nashville just got started. Scarves and Spikes. I really am
Yeah.
not trying. Sounder at Heart. These places exist and these
Yeah.
conversations happen. It's just they're not happening in the same rooms where the quote
And
unquote
again,
big leagues are happening.
maybe that is not something we need to be upset isn't going. I mean, again,
Maybe.
maybe my lament is misplaced. And I'm willing to admit that there's a different Major League Soccer is operating in a different system, like on a different kind of schematic than those old leagues that, again, before media became what it is today, were operating and becoming parts of their communities, and then maybe over time all of this stuff happens. Anyway, it's not a conversation that has a great endpoint, so I'm going to finish it off. Alexander Abnos,
Fair.
again, go read the story if you are so inclined at The Guardian. Support Alexander's writing at The Guardian as well. Thank you, Alexander, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Alexander Abnos, talking about media coverage and storylines and controversy and all that stuff. I'm fascinated by that. We're going to ask, I'm going to ask for your support here on Morning Kick Around. If you like the show, you want us to keep going, become a member on YouTube, at least subscribe, become a member if you'd like. You get access to the Discord, you get priority comment status, so a bunch of other stuff as well. You can also throw us a little bit of money on ko-fi.com/morning kick around if you want to support us there. That's a great way to help us grow as a channel, add more things, do more shows, get more content out to you rather. You can also follow us on social media at Emma Kick Around, Blue Sky, Instagram, X, those kinds of places. You can send us an email. I didn't mention this earlier, but if you want to send us an old-fashioned email, you can do that at morningkickaround@gmail.com. Let us know things you want us to talk about. Maybe string together all the comments you had on a particular topic because you didn't like what we were talking about, and then I'll read those in one place.